Elena pushed the bedroom door wide and saw Matteo fold a sheet with slow, deliberate hands. He shoved the paper into his robe the instant the light hit his face. Suspicion pushed at her ribs in the same instant. She had noticed small evasions for weeks, and this visible hiding tightened the question in her mouth. "Matteo," she said. He straightened, his fingers resting along the seam of his robe, the fountain pen tucked in the bed rail beside him. The breath in the room smelled of old paper and faint lavender. The paper under his fingers was yellowed at the edge. He did not answer right away. He lifted his chin and met Elena's eyes with a steadiness that asked for something she did not yet understand. Within 4 breaths she had a shape of the problem. Matteo was writing. He had been writing in private, and he had hidden a page when she entered. The stakes were immediate. Someone's name or a secret might be on that sheet. Elena stepped forward and placed one careful hand on the bed rail. Her movements were measured. Suspicion made her check surfaces she had tended for months. She lifted the corner of the robe where the paper disappeared. Matteo's fingers tightened against the edge of the blanket. "Don't," he said, low and careful. The voice had the small softness he kept for private confessions. Elena's mouth closed. She did not touch the paper then. She had been his caregiver for 3 years. She knew how much Matteo guarded control. If he asked, he would want it handled his way. A sudden rasping sound came from Matteo's chest. He coughed, and the cough dragged his breath out of him. The urgency of the room shifted from curiosity to a practical alarm. Elena straightened immediately and moved to the bedside with the speed of someone who had learned to read danger in a single sound. She called, "Nuria." "Call de Alvarez now." The name cut the room. There was no time for hesitation. "Dr." Alvarez arrived in less than 10 minutes, shoes on the porch and a paper bag of overnight supplies in his hand. He checked Matteo's pulse, put a stethoscope to the left side of the chest, frowned at the monitor Elena had insisted on leaving near the bed. "His oxygen is down," he said to Elena. "We need to tighten his meds and make sure affairs are in order." "Time may be limited," the last line without drama. The words themselves created a sharp pressure against Elena's chest. Elena moved to fetch a glass of water as the doctor adjusted tubes and made notes on a pad. Matteo watched them both, jaw clenched. They moved like 2 people used to work under strain. Elena smoothing his pillow, the doctor calling a nurse on his phone, while Alvarez rearranged medication. Elena's eyes caught a scatter of loose papers on the small table beside the sitting chair, the same yellowed pages Matteo had been folding. Her fingers closed around the stack before she could think to ask permission. The top sheet had handwriting she recognized, Matteo's slanted, patient hand. Names and dates ran down the page. One line held a family name she had only heard in Matteo's rare complaints. Vincenzi. She read the word twice, then held the paper at arm's length as if distance might change its shape. Matteo's brief stillness turned to a thin, guarded expression when Elena showed him the line. "Don't," he said again, firmer. He turned his face away, pressing his lips together as if to hold something in. Elena felt the second current of emotion arrive, fear not for herself, but for anyone whose name lived on the page. Her hands slowed. She remembered his hands folding the paper in the dark. She remembered small details, the old gold watch catching amber light, the fountain pen's cracked lacquer. They meant he had been doing this for a while. Matteo, who is Vincenzi. Elena, speaking the name clearly so the doctor and the nurse could hear. Dialogue in the room snapped into function. Dr. Alvarez glanced up. "You need to consider next steps," he said. "If he is writing, decisions may be imminent." "Elena, you should make sure his affairs are arranged." The doctor's plainness forced the question into the open. Were the pages a confession, an explanation, or a map of harm? Before Matteo could answer, the front door slammed and voices broke the narrow calm of dawn. Marco stood in the doorway, his jacket still zipped, face red from the cold or from anger. He had been gone for years. He was Matteo's son and carried into the house a suitcase of accusation as if the door alone had been a trigger. Elena stepped back to give them space. Marco's eyes went straight to the table where the papers lay in Elena's hand. "What is that, Marco?" His voice had a hard edge, the kind of sharpness that comes from carrying a long silence. "Matteo, have you been hiding things from me?" He had a wound on his forearm, a ragged scar where sinew met skin. Under the sleeve she could see the tremor in his fingers. The room folded into a confrontation. Alina put the paper down on the table with 2 thumbs, careful not to crease the corner. Matteo's reply was a measured refusal. Marco, go sit. We'll speak calmly, he coughed and then said, with a voice that wanted to close the argument, a please. Marco laughed once, a bitter sound calmly. After what you did. He advanced a step. The exchange pivoted the night. What had been a private hiding now became an accusation aired in the doorway. Nicola Ferri appeared at the gate shortly after dawn with a paper envelope in hand. He left it on the doorstep and stood a little back, watching the house like a man who expected reaction. Alina had seen Nicola before. A weathered associate who moved like someone practiced in giving messages without words. He lingered at the gate long enough for Alina to take the envelope in bare hands. The envelope felt thick and slightly damp from the morning. It bore no return name, only Matteo's initial in a corner. The presence of Nicola changed the weight in the room again. Marco bent to pick up the envelope as if it might be evidence. Alina opened the flap with a fingernail and found a note, a single line that read, "Not everything is for the light." The phrase landed in the quiet. Marco's face tightened further. He who's protecting who? Matteo. His voice was small and raw. Elena moved closer to Matteo's bed. She needed to place herself as a barrier, not as a judge. When the house fell slightly into the hush after Nicola left, Alina stole a moment and withdrew a single page from the stack. She went to the kitchen nook where the kettle sat cooling and sat at the small table with the paper in her hand. Her pulse had a steady knock in her ears. She read the paragraph without letting her eyes dart. The paragraph was a direct confession of a protection Matteo had arranged years earlier, names left blank except for one he did not cross out, Vincenzi. The paragraph described a choice, a payment, a moved person and a face he had chosen not to mention by name. The writing was practical, not rhetorical. It listed facts and dates and a single instruction, that some pages were never to be mailed. Alina felt her face go tight. There was an emotion that rolled through her then, doubt shifting into a harsher shape, fear that someone had been sacrificed for safety. She folded the page back and held it over the sink as if the water would wash the lines. Instead, her hands trembled. She had to act on this fear. Matteo's life had made him a protector. The pages suggested he had also decided to redirect harm. When she returned to the bedroom, Matteo's breathing had worsened. Draw. Alvarez had tightened the oxygen and set a timer for the next check. Marco stood with his arms crossed, jaw working. The confrontation began in the small space between them. Matteo, Marco, did you hide them? Did you hide people? Did you decide who lived? He spoke in the clipped manner of a man who had rehearsed the question for years. The reply came slow. Marco, leave this to me. His voice cracked on the last word. Matteo's hand slid to his robe pocket where Alina had seen him tuck the paper. Marco stepped forward, and demands crowded the room. Leave it to you. You left me out for years, Matteo. Marco's anger flared into a close, hurried exchange of short lines. Marco, sit down. No. No, Matteo, we will speak later. Later isn't coming back. What you took. Marco, don't say my name like a whisper. Marco, please, please, please. You think a please fixes this? They traded 6 short lines until Matteo's breath racked and Alvarez placed a calming hand on his shoulder. That touch shifted the room's energy. Marco's mouth closed, lower jaw clenched. Elena felt a firmness arrive in her chest, a decision forming from doubt and fear and care. The pages were evidence and mercy at once. She had to decide what mercy looked like. Alina, for a private moment, she moved Matteo's bed so that the window light fell on his hands. She took the envelope that Nicola had left and slid the yellowed pages inside after she checked the stack again. Marco watched her as if she might be plotting. She read a line aloud softly so Matteo could hear. I moved them. I made sure they were not found. Matteo's throat worked, for their safety, he added. The sentence landed without apology. Elena listened to how the line sat in his mouth, controlled, deliberate. An unexpected twist arrived then. One of the pages held a photograph folded into the corner, a small creased image of a woman laughing in the back of a car years earlier, Matteo much younger beside her and a child asleep on his lap. The child's face was blurred at the edge of the crease, but the woman had the same smile Elena had seen in Matteo's old album. The presence of the photo shifted the meaning of the pages. This was not only operational record, it was memory smuggled into confession. Marco's hands shook as he recognized a face in the photograph and called out a name that made both men still. "Is that Lucia?" Matteo's eyes closed for a moment. He did not deny the name. Marco's anger folded into another shape. "Betrayal, you replaced us. Marco, you protected strangers and left me not knowing if I had a place." His words were a small, precise blade. Matteo opened his mouth and then closed it. He reached for Elena's hand with surprising force and his fingers found her wrist. The contact held a request and a plea. Elena realized the chapter's central decision had arrived. The paper in her hands could open wounds or spare them. The rules jure. Alvarez had recommended arrange affairs, clarify last wishes bent under the moral weight of what Matteo had chosen to protect. Marco demanded truth. Nicola's note suggested secrets remained necessary. Elena's doubt shifted into resolve. She would choose between exposing Matteo's protection and preserving the quiet safety he had engineered. She set the photograph back into the envelope and placed the yellowed stack on the windowsill. The morning light was brittle and warm. It caught the edges of the paper and flickered across Matteo's old gold watch on his wrist. Elena did not make a speech. She moved with small gestures. She smoothed the edge of the stack, aligned the envelope with the sill's edge, and set a glass of water where Matteo could reach it. Her hands were steady. Matteo reached for the envelope once, then withdrew his fingers, as if touch might undo what he had asked the world to hold. Marco watched him with a look of hurt that made small cracks in his voice. "So you want me to believe you left us for them?" "Marco." Elena answered instead. "Marco." Matteo did what he thought would keep people safe. Her voice was not pleading, it was factual, shaped by care and exhaustion. "Dra." Alvarez stepped forward and said, "We need a practical plan. If you want this settled, document it, sign what you can, and make it clear what is to be burned or kept." The doctor's words returned the room to policy and next steps. Marco sat heavily in the parlor chair and folded his arms. Matteo's hand drifted to his chest and clenched the fabric of his robe. Outside, a small procession of noises. A car in the distance, a neighbor's radio, a dog barking down the street. Inside, the decision compressed into the movement Elena chose. She did not read every line aloud. She selected a single paragraph that named decisions and set down the steps Matteo had taken to hide people and reroute danger. She read the paragraph slowly, and each time she read a name aloud it landed heavier in the air. When she finished, Marco looked at Matteo the way a son looks at a father who has kept a life away from him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marco whispered. The question had the length of years in it. Matteo answered with a small, even breath, "I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I thought my presence risked more than it saved." The sentence was not a justification. It was a confession of method. Marco's mouth formed a laugh that had no humor. He bent forward, thinner now in the light, and said, "You left me to make my own choices without saying why. That was a decision too." His voice cracked at the end. The exchange brought a new, sharp event. Matteo's breathing stuttered and then steadied. "Dra." Alvarez moved to adjust the oxygen again. Marco stood up, moved to the window, and pressed his palms against the glass. Nicola's envelope had been placed on the sill beside the pages. It seemed to hold both a threat and a benediction. Elena felt a shift of emotion inside her, a movement from fear toward a tired compassion that asked for mercy in precise terms. She made the decision then. She took the envelope, slid 3 pages into it, and left the rest in the box on the table. She folded the chosen pages in half once, carefully, and placed them with the photograph. She did not tell Marco which pages she had chosen. She did not read them again. Her choice was concrete. Preserve the names that made safety possible, withhold those that would invite immediate danger. She set the envelope back on the sill, its flap tucked but not sealed. "Matteo," she said, speaking plainly, "I will keep what protects people alive out of sight. But I will also record that you were here and what you did in a way that will not drag those you protected into the open." She looked at Marco. "Marco, you will know some things now. The rest will be handled to avoid harm." Marco's shoulders sagged in a way that suggested surrender or exhaustion. He looked at his father and did not know whether to curse him or to weep. A small, unexpected moment of softness arrived. Matteo laughed once, short and almost surprised. "Thank you," he said, and the word was like a release of air. It did not fix what had been broken. It did not heal the years of absence, but it was an acknowledgement that someone had chosen to treat the truth with care. They did the practical work there. Alvarez suggested signatures, lists of contacts, instructions to burn or preserve specific pages. Elena organized papers into 2 envelopes, one to remain sealed and one to be catalogued with Matteo's legal counselor. Marco watched her as if he were learning how to be an adult in an hour. The house moved through each task with a steady, utilitarian rhythm. When the tasks were done, Matteo for a glass of water. Elena handed it to him and smoothed his robe. He reached for her hand with a slow, deliberate motion, fingers cool and thin. "Elena," he said, his voice small, "promise me, if I don't wake well, you will choose mercy as I would." She did not answer aloud at first. She put a thumb on his knuckles and felt for the steady beat beneath. Her reply came as a nod and a single word, "I will." The vow was not theatrical. It was a compact between 2 people who had worked together in the quiet corners of a complicated life. Morning moved toward a low sun. Marco stepped outside to smoke, then returned with an exhaustion that looked like relief. Nicola did not come back to the gate. The silence that filled the house was practical and heavy. It held the fact of the decision Elena had made. She went to the windowsill once more and folded the envelope closed, then placed it where Matteo could reach it without exertion. The physical act concluded the chapter's conflict. She had read, judged, and set limits. Matteo closed his eyes and rested his head against the pillow. Alvarez wrote notes and left instructions for the next nurse. Marco sat in the parlor, hands clasped, looking older and younger at once. Elena took one last look at the stack of yellowed pages in the box and then turned to straighten a blanket on the couch. Her breathing carried a tightness that was not only fatigue, it held acceptance formed from action. She left the windowsill open a finger width and pushed the curtain aside so the light would fall on the envelope, as if to make sure it existed in the world. It would remain until Matteo otherwise, or until danger forced different steps. The day was not reconciled, but a practical line had been drawn. Elena walked back to the bedroom, adjusted Matteo's pillow, and smoothed the robe over his chest. The single line she had not spoken in months. "I'll be here." Matteo turned his head slightly, the movement small and unmistakable, and his hand curled around hers. The room settled into a careful quiet that did not promise healing, but it did promise that an action had been taken and a choice made. Outside, a car passed slowly down the lane and a neighbor called a child's name. Inside, Elena set a cup of tea on the side table and checked the watch Matteo had always worn. The house felt like a ledger closed on one page and left open on another. She sat for a long breath and then moved to fetch a clean sheet for the next hour, ready to be practical, to answer calls, and to keep watch. The final scene of the chapter is small and precise. Elena closed the window after tucking the envelope further into the sill and drew the curtain so the late light would not wake Matteo. She left a folded page on the sill, neither burned nor delivered, and walked back to the bed to watch the man she had cared for breathe through the night. Elena shoved the study door and the lock groaned. Suspicion had already tightened her breath when the key refused to turn. She had come for Matteo's pain medication, not secrets, but the sight at the desk stopped her. A small wooden box with a brass clasp, the lid closed and dusted in a way that said someone had hidden it recently. The box sat beside an open blotter and a fountain pen with a cracked lacquer barrel. Suspicion pushed her forward. She set the pill bottle down and knelt to test the clasp. She had seen Matteo hide things before. A week earlier she had pushed his bedroom door wide and watched him fold a sheet and shove paper into his robe the instant the light struck his face. That evening the gesture had been small and awkward. Now the box felt like an answer she had not asked for but needed. She held her fingers at the brass and heard the floorboard whisper as someone moved in the hallway. "Elena." Matteo's voice came from the doorway before his figure did, low and measured. Elena did not look up. "There's a box on your desk," she said. Her hand tightened. "What is it?" Matteo paused in the doorway with his hand on the frame. He wore his robe over a soft shirt, hair slicked back but loose at the temple where silver showed thickest. The scar along his jaw was more visible than usual in the thin light of early morning. "Nothing you need to worry about, Matteo." He took 2 steps, then stopped. "Hand me the bottle first." Elena handed him the pills, but she kept her eyes on the box, her chest pressed with a new emotion. doubt moving toward alarm. She had to know what was inside before someone else did. She had already lived the night in which he shoved paper into his robe. She did not want the next night to hold more hiding. Matteo set the medication on the blotter and walked to the desk with a slow, controlled gait. His fingers hovered above the box but did not touch it. "It's just old notes," he said. "Letters I never meant to send." "Whose letters?" "Alina." Her voice was small for how high her pulse felt. He met her eyes, the dark brown lids narrowing. "A few names." "Nothing that changes anything now." He covered the box with his palm like a shield. This was the first emotion shift, from suspicion to guarded anger. Elena's reaction was immediate. She pushed back from the desk chair and stood. "Matteo, you have to tell me. You keep shutting me out. I take care of you and you hide pieces of your life." Matteo's jaw tightened. He stood with his shoulders square. "I am not hiding from you. I am protecting things that should remain closed." Before Elena could answer, the front door banged open and shoes thumped in the hall. Marco Ricci arrived unannounced, suit jacket slung over one arm, the smell of wet pavement on his coat. Marco did not look at Elena. His eyes went straight to Matteo's desk and to the box. "Matteo, Marco," the name was an instrument he used to measure distance. "We must talk about the papers. I heard you have documents." Matteo's face changed. The openness he had held for Elena narrowed into a small, practiced neutral. "Marco," he said, "now is not a good time." Marco's glance slid toward Elena, assessing. "Noted." "I won't take much." He closed the parlor door behind him and moved with the efficiency of a man used to endings. Elena felt the second emotion shift, anger curdling to fear. Matteo crossed to the window and drew the curtains only halfway, as if half darkness would be a better companion than full light. "Elena." Matteo quietly closed the door. "Sit." She obeyed but stayed near the desk. Marco sat opposite Matteo and placed his wet umbrella against the side table. He did not call Matteo by any softer name. "You know why I'm here, Matteo. I've had men asking questions, families asking questions. Papers change hands quickly when someone dies." Elena heard the implication as if someone had set a match near tinder. She glanced at the box, at the fountain pen that Matteo fingered like something fragile, and then toward the parlor door where Marco's shadow lay like a heavy object. Matteo's voice did not rise. "They are letters, not all of them for public reading. Letters name names. Marco." He reached for the box, and his hand paused over the brass as though considering force. "Names that pull old debts into new daylight." Elena moved. She stepped between Marco and Matteo with a quiet speed that surprised both men. "Don't touch his things," she said. "Don't use them as bargaining chips." Marco looked at her the way a surveyor looks at unexpected architecture. "You are his nurse, yes. You have access. Help me locate what matters and we can settle this cleanly." "No," Elena answered. "You will not rummage through a man's private grief, because your people are restless." Marco's mouth tightened. For the first time his posture lost some outward patience. "Elena, I'm not treating you like a child." Matteo signed these and the ledger closes. Matteo's hand brushed the fountain pen and then withdrew. He set his palm over the box again. "I cannot sign what I do not have." There was a pause like a held breath. The third external event arrived. Marco's demand forced Matteo to produce paperwork or refuse. He refused. Marco leaned forward. "Matteo, you don't have the luxury of nostalgia anymore. You either give up what names you have or those names will lead people to you. Do you understand?" Elena's hands clenched at her sides. Her chest tightened physically. She walked to the kitchen to make coffee because motion steadied her. While the kettle hissed, she found herself thinking in terms of facts. Which names could endanger whom? Who still lived in this city, who had left and who had not? She read the faces of Matteo's photographs sometimes without seeing them. Now she wanted to know if the faces in those yellowed prints matched any living kindling. At the small kitchen table, Elena unfolded one of the photocopies she had made earlier of Matteo's prescriptions to check dosing. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the envelope she had tucked into her apron pocket on a whim that morning. She had not planned to open anything. Curiosity sharpened by fear made her slide a single page from the wooden box where she had secretly stowed a recipe. The handwriting was Matteo's neat, the ink slightly faded, and the line at the top named a person she recognized. The page read, "For Luca Bellini, not forgiveness, explanation." Her eyes snagged on the name. Luca Bellini. Elena remembered the name from a newspaper clipping Matteo had kept folded inside a photograph years ago. Luca had survived an attack in a different part of the city. He had left town afterwards. Her pulse jumped. The mini cliffhanger hit. Luca Bellini was alive, and the letter implied Matteo's hand. Elena raked her fingers through her hair and stood. She carried the page back to the parlor and did not announce what she had found. Instead, she folded it carefully and placed it back where she had taken it from, then watched both men from the doorway. "What is that?" Marco, not taking his eyes off the desk. "Nothing you need to see, Marco. Matteo." He avoided saying Luca's name aloud. Elena stepped forward then, voice low but steady. "Matteo, who is Luca Bellini?" Matteo closed his eyes. His hand went to his mouth as if to stop the next words from escaping. "A man who once owed me a life," he said. "He left town before I could set things right." "Set things right how?" "Elena," she the name aloud now. She watched Matteo's face for any tremor. He looked older than she had seen him in years. "Did you hurt him?" He opened his eyes, and the softness in them surprised her. "Not with intent to do what they say in the papers," he answered. "But choices I made put people at risk. I have letters for people I could not tell." Marco's jaw worked. "So the letters are confessions, evidence." Matteo took a breath and then sat. He folded his hands, fingers laced. "They were not meant to be evidence. They are explanations, apologies, answers I never expected a reply from." Elena felt a new movement in herself, confusion shifting toward resolve. She had to choose which duty mattered more, the duty to protect the man who had let her into his last years, or the duty to people whom the letters might implicate. The emotion inside her tightened into a practical question. What would keep living people safe? If these letters name people still at risk, then they are not harmless. You can't keep them sealed because someone else will use them. Matteo watched her as if measuring the weight of each word. "Then destroy them," he said simply. Elena's hand hovered over the box. "Shouldn't you decide?" she asked. Matteo looked at his hands and then away. "I am tired of deciding on instinct. I do not trust myself to choose what spares or condemns. My hands are not steady enough to burn paper cleanly. Marco will not be satisfied with burnt pages. He will want names. He will want leverage." Marco's tone sharpened. "Then sign the release and tell me what is safe to keep." Matteo's fingers tightened on the pen at last. He did not reach for documents. Instead, he stood and walked to a small shelf. He took down an old cardboard box of photographs and leafed through them until he found one wrapped in tissue. He unfolded it to reveal a younger Matteo leaning toward a laughing woman in a glossy car interior. Elena recognized the woman in the photograph. She had seen that laugh in Matteo's eyes when he looked at the yellowed picture on his bedside table. "Who is she?" "Elena? Anna?" "Matteo." He laid the photograph on the desk. "My wife. She left before I could explain anything. I wrote letters to her I never sent." Elena's throat went tight. The photograph showed a hand on a steering wheel and a mouth mid-smile. The car's interior was smooth leather, and the light captured the movement in a way that made the memory feel factual rather than vague. A bright summer afternoon at a harbor, gull feathers stuck to the edge of the bonnet. Marco's lips formed a question he did not speak. The room hummed with unfinished sentences. Matteo broke the silence. "If these letters reach the people I named, they will reopen wounds. If they stay hidden, they may rot and be used later. I cannot make that call." Elena leaned forward and lifted the brass clasp herself. It resisted at first, then clicked. Inside were folded pages, envelopes, and a small leather-bound notebook. Her fingers brushed the paper and felt the slight tack of old ink. She unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was Matteo's, slow and precise. The opening line read, "I do not expect forgiveness, only a record for the living." Elena's lips moved as she read. Marco reached for the edges of the box. "Let me see them. Let me mark what is dangerous." He Matteo's name like a command. Matteo's hand came down on Marco's. No, it was one syllable, low and final. Marco stared at him, then at Elena. "You will not hand those to me." Marco's face hardened. "You think I come here for a handshake?" "Matteo, you know how these things end. Papers like that, people will die over them. If you want protection, you hand them over in a way that binds people legally." Elena acted before she could overthink. She took a pen from the desk, and with Marco still watching, wrote a single sentence on a fresh page. "She will not be harmed because of what I keep." Her handwriting was careful and flat. She then told Matteo, "Let me copy the passages that name living people. I will give the copies to you. You decide whether to destroy the originals." Matteo's eyes flicked to Marco and back. "You would risk your standing for these papers." Elena met his stare. "I care for a man who trusted me with his quiet end. I'm not willing to hand him over to leverage." Marco snorted. "You make yourself dangerous." Elena took out a fresh sheet and began to copy passages by hand. The action was deliberate. Each letter she formed made her feel more visible and more accountable. For the next hour she read and copied. Matteo sat nearby and watched her with a face that shifted between pride and shame. Marco paced sometimes and asked pointed questions about dates and names. Elena answered with the facts she saw. The second major external event was Marco's impatience turning into pressure. He slid a legal folder across the coffee table and said, "Sign this and hand me whatever you have." Elena kept copying. She found letters addressed to people she had heard Matteo mention once during a late-night cough. A harbor boy who had taken a knife for the wrong man, a woman who had moved away in the middle of the night and never returned, Luca Bellini's single line about a debt repaid in blood. Each line Elena placed onto fresh paper made the risk concrete. When Matteo finally spoke, his voice was old and steady. "Take what you need, Elena. Keep what you can. Destroy the rest." His hand trembled when he reached for his fountain pen. Elena closed the notebook she had filled with copies and set it on the blotter beside the medication. She put the originals back into the wooden box, slid a strip of paper inside that read, "Do not open," and then locked the brass clasp. She took the key and pressed it into Matteo's palm. "I will keep them safe, Matteo. I will not let them become weapons." Marco rose and straightened his tie. He took the legal folder and, after a long look at Matteo, left without signing. He paused at the door. "This changes nothing," he said. "People will ask." "Keep your promises." Marco left. His umbrella left a wet crescent on the porch rug that Matteo later noticed and wiped away with a hand that trembled. The house exhaled in small household noises. The clock on the mantel, the radiator's tick, the refrigerator's hum. The third emotion shift moved from fear toward a calm edged with fatigue. Elena sat on the edge of the sofa and watched Matteo fold his hands in his lap. "Why did you write them?" she asked. The question was practical. She needed motive, not pity. Matteo's gaze dropped to the photograph of Anna. "Because some things needed a witness," he said. "Some truths exist simply to be written down. I wrote them so someone could know what I chose and why. I did not write them to hurt anyone." Elena folded her fingers. "Do you want me to destroy them?" His thumb brushed the key in his palm and he closed his eyes. "I want a mercy small enough to keep those I name from being hunted. I want an act that is honest in itself, not for forgiveness, but for acceptance." Elena thought of the paper in her hand with Luca's name. She thought of a harbor boy who never returned, of a woman who had laughed in a car once and then vanished. She placed the leather notebook of copies beside the medication and then rose. In the bedroom she found a plain envelope on the dressing table and a small white gardenia in a ceramic bowl. She sealed a single copy of the page she had written and slid it into the envelope. She set the envelope on the windowsill where the dusk light bent along the glass and placed the white flower beside it. Her hands were steady when she did it. Matteo shuffled into the room and leaned in the doorway. He watched the envelope and the flower without speaking. "Why one?" he asked. Elena turned. "Because one letter can stand for the rest," she said. "It will not demand an answer. It will exist and someone can read or not read it." Matteo crossed the room and with surprising delicacy, took the envelope between two fingers. He did not open it. He placed his thumb along its folded edge and held it there as if feeling the sealed paper's bones. His hand trembled. He set the envelope back down and, for the first time that day, spoke with a voice that let the shape of an apology fall into the room. "Thank you, Elena." She sat beside the windowsill and rested her hand on the cool glass. Outside someone drove past and the car's tires sang on wet pavement. The house settled. There was no triumphant resolution, only a fragile, practical truce. Elena kept the notebook of copies at the small table near the kitchen where she could reach for it. Matteo sat back in his chair and watched the curtains for a while before he closed his eyes. When the house quieted, Elena stood and smoothed the folds of the curtain. She looked at Matteo and then at the sealed envelope. She thought of Marco's passage through the room, of the threat it implied, and of the living people whose names had been on those pages. She did not speak another grand line about beginnings or fate. She lifted the envelope and, with a decisive movement, placed it back on the windowsill so the white flower lay against its edge. Matteo reached out, his fingers hovering a fraction of an inch from the paper, and then stopped. The chapter ends with that small, specific motion. Matteo's hand hovering over the sealed envelope on the windowsill and not taking it, the decision held between them. The house holding its breath around the single white flower. Elena sprinted down the hospice corridor, clutching folded pages when Matteo's voice cut across the light. "What have you taken?" Suspicion sat heavy at her ribs and pushed her feet faster. She rounded the corner with the paper bundle pressed to her chest and nearly collided with the doorway. Her hands trembled as she held the pages, not from cold but because suspicion had become the engine of every step she'd taken all night. She kept moving because she had to decide whether to show the letters or keep them hidden. The choice would change more than the hours ahead. She pushed the bedroom door open with the heel of her hand and moved into the warm square of Matteo's lamp. Matteo sat propped on pillows in a robe that had lost its stiffness. The gold watch lay loose on his wrist. He looked smaller than the story said he had been, but his voice kept the sharpness of command. "Elena, Matteo," and his jaw set, as if he were preparing an order, not a question. Elena's first breath came in a short rush. "I took them to decide what mercy looks like," she said, and the words hit the room like a small, blunt instrument. She put the pages on her palm so Matteo could see the edges, the uneven ink, the fold lines she had traced with her fingers in the corridor. Her mouth wanted to explain everything. Her hands stopped it in the act of setting the bundle on the bedside table. Matthew's dark, brown eyes narrowed. "The box," he said, "the wooden box on my desk. Where is it?" Elena stepped toward the desk because actions make answers as clearly as any sentence. She had forced the study lock the night before and found the box. She had carried it from the desk into the corridor, and it had weighed on her more than the pages. "I have it. I brought a page for you to read." Her voice did not plead. It measured out each syllable like a patient testing the strength of a rope. Matteo's hand found the robe's front and tightened. "A page?" he asked. The word was small and curious and dangerous. He leaned forward, and without a pause Elena unfolded the top page. She read the first line aloud because Matteo heard to and because words on a page change a room. To Lucia she read, "I should have told you sooner about the night by the river. I cannot ask your forgiveness, only that you know the truth." Lucia's name landed in the air like a stone. Lucia arrived before anyone could choose silence. The door opened and Lucia Romano stepped in as if she had expected the exact moment. Her hair was arranged the way it had always been, severe, pulled back, and the cold set around her mouth like a shape you rereading his words. "Lucia." She looked at Matteo first, then at Elena, then at the folded paper on the table. Elena placed a hand on the paper as if to protect it. "Matteo, me to read one page aloud," she said. She felt suspicion shift under her ribs to something tighter, an urgent care that needed room in the conversation. Her breathing shortened. Her palms left faint salt rings on the paper. Lucia crossed to the chair and sat without asking. "You took his box," she said to Elena. "You went into his study when he was asleep. Why?" Elena's answer came in an even tone because he kept secrets and because he asked me, in his way, to make a decision when he could not choose clearly. Her fingers folded the edge of the page. She did not say he'd hidden whole years behind tailored suits. She showed the paper instead. Matteo watched Lucia with a slow, almost practiced stillness. His scarred jaw tightened. "Lucia," he said, and the name carried a history between them that made the air in the room brittle. "I wrote what I could. You can listen." His voice had the softness he used late at night, the softness Elena had learned not to mistake for surrender. Lucia's face hardened. "I didn't come to listen to excuses," she said. "I came because you owe the family clearer things than shadows." Her mouth moved like an accusation placed on a table. A bell on the nurse's station chimed twice. A nurse passed in the corridor and glanced at the open door. The passage of time intruded with the practical detail of a medical cart. Father Andres arrived then, in a careful, deliberate way, carrying a small leather-bound book and the steadiness he had for moments like this. Father Andres, Matteo, and his hand relaxed a degree. Father Andres set his book on the bedside table and kept his voice low. If you wish, I can stay as witness, or read, or counsel. The choice is yours. Elena felt the scene tilt again. Suspicion had opened the door. Now the presence of Lucia and Father Andres altered every possible outcome. She looked from one face to the next. Her next movement was a small, honest one. She smoothed the top page and read a line aloud that she had not practiced. I ordered a man to be taken that night. She read, voice level. Because the letter used plain verbs and dates that could be checked, he died by the river. I told myself it was for the family. I tell you now because hiding this from you is its own cruelty. Her mouth didn't shake. Her hands rested on her knees as if to steady herself. Lucia's breath hitched. Man, she demanded. The line of questions came sharp. Name, date, consequence. Lucia's control showed as anger pressed into words. Matteo's eyes closed for a second. When he opened them, the clarity in them was not the confusion Elena had expected. He nodded in a way that made the room hold its breath. Yes, he said, it was him. I will not hide it. The confession was a small, flat statement, but the room heard how much it had cost. The moral line shifted into the concrete. Lucia stood. Then you must tell me everything, she said. No quiet files, no private pages. If someone died because of you, I want names. Her fingers tightened on the chair back. Matteo's mouth formed a word and then another. He looked at Elena and then at Lucia. Some things I write are not meant for the world, he said finally, the voice thick as if grasping for a lost cadence. They are meant to close a ledger in my head. They are not made to break living people. He used the word ledger like an accountant who had counted debt for decades. That line, ledger, shifted suspicion into doubt for Elena. Doubt threaded her actions now. She wondered if the letters were private contrition or a confession that demanded action. Her hands moved. She reached for the wooden box at the foot of Matteo's desk and brought it back to the bedside lamp. The box had a brass clasp that resisted her thumb for a second before it gave. Inside the box were yellowed photographs, names written in tight script, and a second stack of papers bound with a thread. Elena lifted the photographs one by one. A young Matteo laughing in a glossy car interior, a crowded family table where Lucia was a child, a man with a scar by the river. Each image changed the scale of the words she had read. Why didn't you tell me, Lucia Matteo? Her voice had a quick edge now, the edge that comes when family history has been rearranged without consultation. Lucia's hands were fists and then not fists. She kept moving to stay controlled. Matteo's answer arrived as a small, deliberate sound. Because I thought I could protect you by keeping it private, he said. Because I thought truth would only hurt further. He looked at Elena and his tone shifted from a man commanding others to a man asking one person to keep his last wish. Elena. Some of these papers I want to keep sealed. Let them be mine to carry. An argument erupted fast. Each line short and sharp in the way arguments do when decisions have to be immediate. You can't decide alone. Lucia, you put names in a letter and expect mercy to be private. You can't do that, Lucia, Matteo answered. I have nothing left to bargain with except the truth in written form. If I hand everything to you now, it will be used to break things that cannot be mended. His voice had a firmness like a man who had seen what exposure could do. You exposed someone already, Lucia shot back. You Elena, the doorstep of it by your river. I don't want secrets behind your bed while I repair our life. Elena did not speak at first. Her heart had tightened in her chest. Suspicion had become doubt and now folded into a low, wary caution. She put both hands on the edge of the box. Matteo me to decide what mercy would look like, she said. He did not ask me to betray anyone. He me to choose compassion or public truth. Her voice was small, but her fingers held the box steady as if to anchor herself. Father Andres rested a hand on the corner of the bedside table. Words can be instruments of harm or of healing, he said. They become different depending on what we do with them. If you wish, I can read a passage aloud to witness it. Elena felt the room shift again. The choice had moved from an ethical question into an action that would change other people's lives. She pulled a single page from the thread, bound stack and unfolded it slowly. Her fingers traced a name and a date. She hesitated, feeling an emotion shift doubt into fear, because once a name was spoken aloud, consequences followed. She began to read, choosing the lines that Matteo had left for his daughter. I spoke for him. I told men to take him because I believed my order was certain. That was an error I have carried. I name him now because silence stole his daughter's chance at justice. Elena stopped. The room inhaled with her. Lucia slapped the arm of the chair. You speak of justice, she said. You speak in the past tense like fault is only an old wound. Who was the man? Her voice broke then and recovered into a sharp intake of air. Elena's voice steadied because she had made a promise to herself to keep one page out. The name here is Paolo Baroni, she read. He was taken from the road outside the river bridge on August 9th. The date landed plainly. The facts now sat on the table like coins. Matteo's face changed. He folded in on himself as if remembering a debt. Paolo, he said. Yes, there was no avoidance now. I ordered it. His admission was small and precise. Lucia's knees went white for a second as if she had been punched. Rapid speech followed. Lucia demanding names, Matteo giving dates, Elena insisting on a single page left for Lucia, Father Andres asking to calm the talk into a reading that could be witnessed. The argument had 3-6 quick exchanges that bent the room in different directions. You can't ask me to be quiet, Lucia, voice high. You can't ask me to bury his name under a windowsill. I am not asking you to bury anything, Matteo. I am asking that the rest remain private so that no more harm is done by retribution or exposure. Who are you protecting with silence? Lucia shot back. The room stalled because the question needed more than answers. It needed choices. Elena felt an emotion shift from fear into clarity. Clarity her that the letter had to be partly seen and partly kept. She looked at Matteo and then at Lucia and made a decision in motion. She would leave one folded page where Lucia would find it in the morning, and she would keep the sealed bundle tucked in the wooden box under her care, Matteo, Elena. And the name summoned his attention. Leave a single folded page for Lucia on the windowsill. I will keep the rest locked. You will tell Father Andres if you wish this read aloud to anyone later. But for now, we do this small thing to open truth without destroying people. Her words were measured and each became an action as she slid the single page into an envelope. Lucia brushed her hair from her face with a hard, fast motion. That is not enough, she said, but it is something. She did not smile. She sat back down and folded her hands into a way of holding herself steady. Matteo reached for the envelope with a hand that quivered. Put it by the little white flower on the sill, he said. I will trust that to you, Elena. Elena walked to the window with the folded page and placed it beside the small white flower in the pot. Her fingertips lingered on the paper for a second, then she walked back to the bed and returned the wooden box to the bedside drawer. She slid the drawer closed with a hand that pressed as if filing the action into a ledger of decisions. Nurse Carla arrived then because the hospice monitor warned of a drop. She checked Matteo's oxygen and adjusted his pillow with practiced motions. He's spiking a fever, Nurse Carla. Her hands moved quickly as she called for medication and a chart. The urgent medical movement compressed the argument into a few practical beats. Matteo coughed hard and then convulsed in a small, choking way. Elena moved first. She lifted his shoulder and called out for help. Nurse Carla had already reached the syringe. Father Andres recited a short prayer while Lucia hovered uncertain and sharp. The medical crisis turned words into immediate action and removed any luxury of time. When machines calmed and Matteo's breath found steadier ground, the room held a new quiet. The crisis had forced things into motion. It had also forced Matteo's hand. He opened his eyes and looked at Elena with a tired steadiness. Leave the rest sealed, he said, but let that one page be hers in case she needs to know. He blinked slowly. Elena felt the final emotion shift settle, from suspicion to doubt to fear to clarity and then to a hushed, guarded compassion. She had been pulled into an ethical threshold and had chosen a compromise that honored confession but tried to limit harm. She reached into the drawer, slipped the boxed papers into her bag, and fastened the clasp. Lucia stood and came to the bedside. She looked at Matteo and then at Elena. If this changes anything for any of you, she said, voice low, we will have to do it in daylight. We will need legal counsel, and we will need to speak plainly. Her pragmatism functioned as a new, external event. A plan that shifted the stakes from private to public in the coming hours. Matteo nodded once. Give me tomorrow at first light, He said, "If there is to be a public reckoning, make it then." The words were small. He closed his eyes against the lamp's amber glow. Elena walked to the windowsill and tapped the single envelope with a fingertip. The small white flower leaned toward the light. She left the wooden box in her bag and took the busiedness of the ward as a cue to move. Nurse Carlo adjusted Matteo's blanket. Father Andres straightened his book. Lucia walked out into the corridor with a determined step that seemed to carry the next day's plan. Elena paused at the doorway and turned back. "Matteo," she said, "I'll keep what you asked. I will stay with the box tonight and guard it." She did not say how she would weigh every page when morning came. She did not promise a final judgment. She promised only presence. Matteo opened his eyes, and the surprise at that promise was brief and simple. He gave her a small nod, a soft motion that felt like acceptance. Elena closed the door behind her, the corridor light folding over her shoulders. She walked down the hall with the wooden box tucked under her arm and the single folded page left on the sill. The choice had been made. One page for Lucia, the rest kept safe for a time. The chapter ended not with neat absolution, but with a small, concrete act, the envelope on the windowsill and Elena carrying the locked box into the coming hours. The morning would bring decisions, and with them the consequences of a confession named aloud. For now, the threshold had been crossed, and the room kept its held breath in the shape of a white flower and a folded page. Isabella shoved the hospice door open and said, "Tell me what he wrote." Elena had the unfolded pages in one hand and the smaller envelope in the other. Suspicion tightened her breath the way a fist tightens around a pen. Matteo lay between blankets, his chest rising in shallow counts, the lamp rim lighting the silver mustache at his lip. Nurse Mara stood at the foot of the bed, fingers still on the chart, and the corridor clock read 3:20 in the morning. The immediate problem was clear. A family arrival had turned private papers into public property, and Elena had to decide in seconds whether to hand over the letters or hide them again. Elena did not wait to explain. She crossed to the bedside, kept her voice low, and set the stack on the side table, where Matteo could see if he opened his eyes. She moved with precise small motions. She smoothed one corner of the paper, folded it back a fraction, and closed her fingers over the envelope, as if its weight could tell her what to do. The suspicion that had followed her since the unlocked study, the box with its brass clasp, and the mornings when Matteo had slid a photograph under a book, that suspicion now pushed her toward action. She remembered the night she had found him folding a page and shoving it into his robe. The memory was not vague, it was the exact scrape of paper against skin and the breath he held when the light fell across his hands. "You brought things, Isabella." Her voice blunt, her face cut with a line Elena had seen in photographs of younger family rows. Impatience and grief, "I want to see them. All of them." Isabella came forward and the lamp light caught the hard set of her jaw. Elena felt an initial shift. Suspicion hardened into fear, not of Matteo's illness, but of what exposure would do to people outside this room. The second shift followed quickly. Fear bent into a protective clarity. Elena had watched Matteo fold those pages. She had found the wooden box. She had run with paper under her coat down a corridor. Those were not feelings, they were actions she had already taken. Now someone else demanded to change the stakes. Isabella, Nurse Mara, using the name like an appeal. "He's very fragile." Nurse Mara's hand hovered toward Matteo's shoulder. She kept the chart between them like a small shield. Elena heard the practical voice of someone who had measured respirations and dosages and knew the balance of agitation and calm. The practical voice pushed for a pause. Elena looked at Matteo's closed hand on the blanket and at the old gold wristwatch on his wrist, the watch he had never taken off. She thought of the cracked lacquer fountain pen on the bedside tray and the yellowed photographs in their small box. Those objects had weight here. They would carry consequences beyond the room if moved. Isabella stepped around the chair and reached for the papers on the table. Elena's hand covered the envelope like an instinctive apology. "Please, Elena," keeping to short sentences. Her voice was steady. "These are his pages. He is not well enough for this right now." There was an immediate, sharp exchange. Isabella's patience collided with Elena's duty. The room narrowed to faces and hands. "He is my father. Isabella, I deserve to know what he wrote." "You deserve that when he can speak for himself," Elena answered. 3 quick lines of dialogue later, Isabella, no. You brought those out of his study. You can't decide for me. Nurse Mara's fingers tightened on the chart. The debate unfolded in clipped rhythms. Elena had to buy time. She placed the envelope flat and pushed forward another page from the top of the stack. The page was a torn sheet folded twice, the edges soft with handling. She did not glance down at the writing. She handed the visible sheet to Isabella with only the action of offering. Isabella opened the page with a thumb that trembled only slightly, and her eyes moved faster than the lamplight. Who is this for? She asked. Why is he apologizing? Elena watched the way Isabella read names and dates as if they were knives. A new external event arrived. Footsteps in the corridor, and the hush of a voice asking for Father Aldo. Isabella snapped her head toward the door and then back. The room tilted into a family convergence. Father Aldo entered with a thin rosary wound through his fingers. He moved slowly, as a man who had spent years speaking in bedside rooms about forgiveness. He did not sit immediately. He scanned Matteo's face and then looked to Elena and Isabella. Is this a private matter? He asked, but his tone was gentle enough to carry authority. The presence of the priest altered the atmosphere. Spiritual absolution and earthly accountability now sat at the same bedside. Elena felt the second major shift of emotion. Protective clarity turned inward into doubt whether Matteo's words, if released, would heal or harm. Isabella began to press with more force. What else is there? She asked. Photos, letters, names. Her speech shortened into a series of demands. She pulled the wooden box toward her and clicked the brass clasp open with a precise hand. Inside, photographs lay stacked. Matteo at a younger age. A woman laughing in a glossy car interior framed by warm light. A building with boarded windows. A child's shoe on a table. The photographs were concrete evidence. Isabella held one and said a name Elena did not recognize. Matty stirred and made a small, deliberate gesture toward Elena's hand. The gesture was not a full sentence, but it was a communication he had used many times in years when speech betrayed him. A long index finger pressed against his lips, then pointed at the small envelope Elena had kept in her palm. Elena understood. She had seen the same motion once before, when Matteo had tucked a single page into his robe in the bedroom, and would not tell her why. In that moment, the moment Matteo's attention touched the envelope, Elena felt fear return and then bend into determination. She slid the envelope across the table a fraction, toward Matteo, where his fingers might still find it. He made me promise, Elena quietly to Isabella. Naming the commitment she had taken on the first night she entered his room, he me to protect him from himself. I can't. Her sentence broke on the weight of responsibility. Isabella's reply was a small, sharp laugh that did not reach her eyes. Protect him from what? Elena. From the truth. Isabella from the people who were hurt. The argument expanded. Isabella wanted public truth. Father Aldo wanted confession with contrition spoken aloud. Nurse Mara wanted a stable bedside and fewer visitors. Elena wanted to balance mercy and accountability. Each demand was a pressure point. Elena's body reacted with little, specific things. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She breathed through a pinch in her ribs. She pinched the edge of the envelope between thumb and forefinger. Those small motions declared as much as any line of speech. When Elena finally opened the smaller envelope, she found a single paragraph. The lines had the directness of a man who wrote for record rather than performance. Names, places, an admission of acts carried out on orders, and a brief address to people he called victims. The paragraph did not plead for forgiveness. It placed responsibility in clear language and named the families who had never been acknowledged. Isabella read the lines aloud, her voice a mix of shock and a suddenly discovered authority. The words changed everything. The moral weight of the pages shifted. What had been private remorse became a ledger. Isabella slammed the photograph down. He wrote to them. She said. He named them. Her fingers returned to the paper. How could he? Later, Elena understood that this paragraph had been the pivot. In the room it produced a new fury in Isabella and an immediate flinch in Father Aldo, who closed his eyes for a moment, as if weighing confession against the consequences of naming. Nurse Mara looked back and forth between the faces, measuring the pulse on the monitor as if it were a separate, impartial judge. If he wanted that known, Isabella. He could have done it while he could answer for it. He is still alive. He must say it himself. Her words were sharp. Isabella paced the thin space by the bed, and the pacing was an action that pushed time forward. Matteo's hand found Elena's and squeezed with a force that surprised them all. His grip was not strong. It was an instruction. He reached with his eyes and found Elena's, and for a moment she saw the man he had once been. Not the myth, but a man with small gestures. He nodded toward the wooden box. Then he used his other hand, slow and deliberate, to tap his lips and point again at the envelope. He made a gesture of permission and then of renunciation. The gesture forced a new emotional shift in Elena, doubt to clarity. She now had to choose within a small space of seconds whether permission meant release or concealment. Elena, Father Aldo, lowering himself into the chair by the bed. If he asks you to keep this private, you do him a service. But if there are names, there are people who need to hear. His voice did not command. It weighed options. Isabella's answer came quickly. They should hear from him, Father. Not from a paper found in secret. Isabella's face had gone pale in spots where her anger was closest to the skin. He could live with them or apologize in front of them. He can't decide after the fact. They're back, and forth became a short argument. Elena argued for timing and the risk to Matteo's health. Isabella argued for accountability and public reckoning. Father Aldo argued for spiritual clarity and contrition. The required rule, 3 to 6 rapid lines, arrived in the center of the dispute. He can't testify now, Elena. He's fragile, he can... If this is what he wants, Isabella shot back. You don't get to block truth. Father Aldo interjected. He can ask me to hear him, Elena replied. He need to keep his hands steady, not to betray a last breath for the sake of spectacle. Isabella barked. This isn't spectacle. This is closure. The voices layered, each name repeated, each short sentence acting like a stake in the argument. At the peak of the argument, Elena felt a hand at her shoulder. Nurse Mara's presence had been pragmatic until then. Now she touched Elena as if to anchor her in the room. Do not do anything you'll regret, Mara in a practical whisper. If you release those names tonight, people outside will act on them. If you don't, you may block a chance for real healing. The nurse's words were not a moral verdict, but a clinical prediction. The reminder of consequence pushed Elena into a quieter, surgical decision-making mode. Elena placed the smaller envelope flat on the bedside tray and smoothed it with one fingertip. She thought of the people named, not as abstractions, but as a dozen specific lines of text that named mothers, sons, an address, a date. Those names would set wheels in motion if delivered. She also thought of the photograph of the laughing woman in the car, a specific face, and of the child's shoe on the table. These were concrete losses recorded in images. The twist of the chapter, the discovery that the envelope addressed those families and victims directly, forced a recalibration. This was no longer only Matteo's confession. It was a document that could begin a public accounting. Elena rose, walked to the windowsill, and opened the envelope again. She read the paragraph out loud slowly. Each name landed like an object placed on a table. Isabella listened, her jaw working. Father Aldo's lips moved with a silent prayer. Nurse Mara's hand went to the monitor to check a reading. The machine bleeped steady numbers that had nothing to do with sin, but everything to do with life. Elena paused after each line. She measured the room's reaction with small gestures. A swallowed breath, a tightening of the jaw, an exhale that felt like a decision. When she reached the final sentence, the one where Matteo wrote that he did not expect answers, and that he did not demand forgiveness, only acknowledgement, Elena felt the shape of the obligation change. That sentence was deliberate, it for recognition without a need for immediate restitution. It left the choice to others. It did not absolve, it catalogued. Elena felt the final emotional shift, clarity into acceptance. The choice narrowed to how to place that paragraph where it could do the most good and the least harm. She turned back to the bed and saw Isabella hold the paper as though it were both a torch and a weapon. Do you want me to read the rest? Isabella. Her tone had an edge of pleading now. She was not only angry but afraid of a life ledger sealed away. Elena answered simply, I will not read them alone. If he can speak, let him speak. If he cannot, we will decide together. Her sentence was a concession and a rule. Isabella's shoulders dropped a hair. Father Aldo nodded once quietly. Nurse Mara relaxed her hand on the chart. Matteo's breathing became shallower. Father Aldo crossed himself and moved close enough to touch Matteo's brow. If he wishes to speak now, Father Aldo murmured, we will listen. But if not, we proceed with compassion and truth where possible. The priest's words guided the movement toward the decision. Matteo's eyes opened for a moment and found Elena's. He cleared his throat with a small, wasted effort and managed a sentence that was more air than sound. Send it, the word could have meant send the letters, send the envelope, send the photographs. It was ambiguous. Elena counted the beats. A nod, a breath, the hand squeeze. She had seen this man in his better years choose exact words. Now, with pain and fatigue, he gave a motion that demanded interpretation. Elena's heart made a small, definite choice. She gathered the small envelope, folded it once more and slipped it back into the wooden box. She locked the brass clasp, then set the box carefully on the bedside tray. She opened the top drawer of the bedside table and placed the sealed envelope inside. But she left the top of the box resting on the tray where Isabella could see it. She spoke with short, concrete words. "I will take one envelope to the desk to be forwarded under the hospice's name," she said. "The rest will remain sealed until a time we can do it with care," Isabella protested, quick and sharp. "You can't choose the audience, Elena." Elena looked at Matteo and then the priest, and then squarely at Isabella. He named people. Elena. He did not ask for spectacle. "I will send one sealed envelope to the hospice office with instructions to forward it to a neutral mediator if families ask for it." Her voice was measured. Each clause was a small, deliberate action. Isabella's hands fluttered. "Who will be the mediator?" she demanded. "Who decides?" Father Aldo answered. "A council of clergy and a legal advisor the hospice trusts." Elena added, "And I will leave the photographs in the box for now. We will not post them. We will not hand them to the press. We will offer families the option to meet in private if they request it." The terms were practical. They were choices, not platitudes. There was a brief silence. Matteo exhaled in a long whoosh and then fell still. The monitor's rhythm slowed and then steadied to a single long line. Elena felt the weight of the decision settle. She felt a release that was not triumph but the relief of something carried now toward a resting place. Isabella's face shifted. Anger thinned into a fragile sorrow. Father Aldo murmured a prayer and placed a small hand over Matteo's. Nurse Mara checked the chart and closed it. At dawn, Elena rose, folded a single white envelope into a pocket, and walked to the hospice desk. She left one sealed envelope with instructions. "Forward only to families who request mediation. Allow closure without spectacle." She placed a small white flower beside an envelope on the windowsill back in Matteo's room, then turned and walked down the corridor. The morning light hit the paper and showed its small crease. Outside the hospice, Elena took a single breath and felt the last of the chapter's tensions unspool, not into words, but into precise movements. The clock at reception, the motion of her hand setting mail on parchment, the sound of a nurse calling names for the day's rounds. She did not make pronouncements. She did not speak of destiny. She had made a concrete choice. A sealed envelope left to the hospice's procedures and a photograph box kept from exposure. The consequences would unfold in other rooms and other lives. When Isabella left the room, she paused in the doorway and touched Matteo's wrist once. "Goodbye, Papa," she said. Her voice was thin. Elena heard the specificity of that farewell. It was a direct address, no metaphors, just a named person and a named role. Father Aldo stood and straightened his collar. Nurse Mara collected a tray and filed the chart back into its folder. Each of them carried a small, specific action that closed the scene. Elena walked out into the courtyard. She placed a hand on the small box of photographs as if to remind herself of the human faces inside. Then she laid the box on a bench and covered it with a cotton scarf. She did not decide for anyone else. She did not promise closure. She performed discreet acts of care, sealing, forwarding, protecting, offering. Those acts were how she honored the complexity of the man she had tended. The final scene at the windowsill remained. The single white envelope beside a small white flower under pale morning light. It was a simple, concrete image of the choice she had made and of the restraint she had practiced. Elena did not look back when she closed the hospice door behind her. She held the weight of possible futures in both hands and walked away with one sealed action placed where procedure could find it. Later that day, when Isabella called to ask whether the box remained locked, Elena answered with precise details. The box was at the hospice, the clasp intact, the envelope logged. She gave names and times and nothing else. Isabella's reply was brusque, then softer, and for the first time that morning she used Elena's name without anger. The exchanges that followed were hours of concrete arrangements, mediators to contact, lists to compile, lawyers to consult. These were not speeches, they were tasks. At the end, Elena returned to Matteo's room once more to straighten the blanket and to slide the photographs back into their box. She placed the fountain pen with its cracked lacquer beside the yellowed photos. She kissed the edge of the photograph of the laughing woman and tucked it carefully into the lid. Then she closed the box, fastened the clasp, and set it in the drawer. Her final action for the day was simple and exact. She wiped the lamp base with her sleeve, folded one clean cloth over the box, and left the room with a clear, narrow duty fulfilled. The chapter ends not with a grand moral summary, but with a small, concrete beat. Elena crossing the courtyard, the hospice door closing behind her, and the envelope on the windowsill catching the first thin line of sunlight as a nurse arrived for rounds. The decision she made sat where someone else could retrieve it, and she walked away carrying the exact knowledge of what she had done.